Namaskaram, Yan Elikutti, and today I have a very special guest. I'd like to welcome to Elikutti's channel the pioneer behind the hashtag movement, both not half, TED speaker and actor, Mr. Jassa Ahluwalia. Welcome, Swagatham.
Thank you very much.
So I came across Jas's page when he was promoting a Punjabi book club event, and imagine my shock as I check my inbox and a white guy sitting here and he's suddenly rattling off in perfect Punjabi, and I'm just like, what is this? What's going on? So when I went to Jas's page, I wanted to know more about what he did, and what he had told me was that there was something really interesting coming down the pipeline, and that was a TED Talk that he had presented in India itself. So Jassa, why don't you tell me a bit more about that experience, about giving that talk?
Oh wow, yeah, the TED Talk was such an amazing day. It was all really the culmination of this incredible journey I'd been on, coming to understand my own experiences, articulating both not half. And so basically I'd been on over the last sort of 5 years really, or since my childhood really, my whole life I've been sort of trying to understand how I as an adult fit into the world, which seems to really like to divide and label and has very binary notions of what identity can be. And yes, at the start of 2019, I was feeling quite frustrated about the lack of opportunities for me as an actor to really explore this part of me, this my Punjabi heritage, my Indian heritage, in a way. There was no way for me to sort of explore that on screen. There was lots of interesting work that had been coming out in the UK. There's been a shift towards telling stories that are more representative of audiences, but I just didn't see any way for me. They're still limited, those opportunities, but I was like, I want to be involved, but I don't know how, because actually I don't see, people don't see me as mixed heritage, or they don't see the Punjabi part of me because of how I look. So really it was just about trying to find a way to let the world know that, look, I am Punjabi, and I thought maybe doing some sort of comedy skits online would be a fun way to do it. I'd been inspired by the likes of like Guz Khan here in the UK, and Just Rain in Canada, and I was like, well, there seems to be potential and scope and reach for these kinds of videos. So it just sort of came together one night. It wasn't planned at all. The first video I posted didn't have subtitles or anything. I just got out the shower and my hair was wet. I'd started dressing gown on, and I just shot a couple of angles of me making some dal, some lentils, and I put some like Quorn vegan pieces in it, which is a very unorthodox ingredient. And I thought, well, the Punjabi uncle might be quite upset about this, and I sort of did that as the skit, posted it.
Yeah.
It went viral, and then it was in the aftermath of that video going viral that I thought, right, I really need to find a way to express this experience, because people were saying, like, how is this possible? Is he lip syncing? I mean, I'm sure this is something that you've had in the past. It's like I needed to explain succinctly without having to give my whole backstory of like, what does this mean? And so I saw some of the comments were saying, oh yeah, he's half this, half that. And I think really that was like something just clicked in that moment. All the reading, the research, the history, the culture I've been consuming up until that point, something just clicked, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm not half. I've been calling myself half for ages, but I'm not half, I'm both. And that's where the hashtag both not half came, and that seemed to really connect with people. And I built on that over the year, and then towards the end of last year, after I just hosted the Brit Asia Music Awards at Wembley, I was then contacted by the TED team in India and invited to go and speak about it. And fortunately, I'd been writing about both not half for myself. I'd sort of had this personal essay ready to go, which thankfully, with all the pressures of Christmas and everything going on, I was able to then adapt that into the talk, and that's what became the talk, and is now available.
So I like to draw attention to this hashtag both not half, because I think that when we say that someone is half this or 1/4 this, it kind of feels like you have to make space for each part instead of allowing it to coexist. Do you feel that was one of the reasons why you decided that this was a better explanation of your identity?
Hugely that. I think, nobody says the word half caste anymore. That's become known as recognized as a slur. But I think the idea, we've just dropped the word caste, the idea of half, this very reductive sense of, it's basically saying you're not full, and therefore you're not enough. And it was that idea of not being enough that I really wanted to reject, because I felt like, well, just because of the way I look, it doesn't make me, I don't feel any less Punjabi. I feel very Punjabi. I also feel very British and very English. They coexist. They're not separate. You know, I'm not sort of Punjabi to X amount, which means that, you know, I can eat my roti with my hands properly, but I don't know what to do when I go to a wedding or so. It's like there's no, you can't, identity, you know, I always say like people aren't fractions. You can't sort of reduce people. And I think this applies to all aspects of identity as well. I don't think it's necessarily just ethnicity. I think it can be to do with, you know, people's social economic background, or just all sorts of other backgrounds. You know, I've got a mate who was born in, it was Czechoslovakia at the time, but he was born in Czechoslovakia. His mum's Russian, and he's grew up in Germany. And he's got like the whole mix, you know, both not half really resonates for him, because it's about how, you know, identity is fluid and non-binary. And I think this like sort of non-binary idea that we're becoming more familiar with through the conversations around gender and sexuality are worth really thinking on, about like how they really apply more widely. And I think it's really interesting because a lot of, I'm sure you know this as well, like a lot of like Eastern philosophy and spirituality is very much takes this idea that the universe is a unity, a oneness that sort of deceives us with duality. That's the sort of a central idea in Sikh thought, and I think, you know, in a lot of other thoughts, you know, like the yin and yang symbol very much embodied. I was trying to come up with a logo for Both Not Half, and I couldn't like get, I was like, that, I mean, the yin and yang thing, I just can't beat that really. That sort of does it.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. And, you know, with regards to identity, I feel like even though we're speaking more about it on social media, it's not necessarily a new concept or a new conversation. I mean, historically, if you look, humans have never stayed in one place very long. So, you know, even generations ago, there were people that would come from mixed heritages, or the places that they identify with now didn't exist when their grandparents were living there. So I think that even though this conversation is developing, it's really nothing new. It's just being more defined, I think.
And also, you know, I've really discovered this when you know, a big part of my journey has been about tracing my origin, and as part of that is trying to understand and reconcile how I feel about the British Empire and the legacy of the British Empire. And actually, the more I dug into it, the more I found out how, discovering that the actual, you know, a lot of what gets fetishized in the UK, or in England particularly, is the period of the Raj, which is a very short period of history towards the end of the British colonial sort of thing in India. Whereas all prior to the uprising in 1857, you had the whole period where it was the East India Company. And in some of the early days of the East India Company, there was quite a lot of cultural exchange. Now, there was still a lot of discrimination as well, but a lot of that discrimination was on class and like economic lines, not necessarily on racial lines. And it was really interesting to see just how fluid cultures were during that period as well, and how fluid people's sense of identities were as well. And I think, yeah, you're right. The more you dig into history, the more you're like, oh yeah, these sort of very fixed notions that we have. Some lectures I was listening to about European history, and I sort of discovered that the idea of national identity really became a thing during the like 1800s. You know, you get like national institutions and museums sort of perpetuating an idea of national identity, which sort of they were filling a void left by the breakdown of traditional communities. I'm like, oh yeah, this thing that I'm like, am I British? Am I this? Am I that? So these are just ideas that are quite new, and they're not integral to life. So yeah, I sort of shunned them.
No, it's interesting because it if you look at Deccan history, you know, there's this period of time where they were literally importing people to be part of the society because they wanted intellectuals, they wanted artists, they wanted to create this multifaceted society. So they were bringing in people from Persia and Arabia and other
Oh,
neighboring
wow.
countries to kind of create a society that, you know, and of course this did result in some stratification. What was interesting is that some of the imported society was actually seen at a higher level than at the already residing society. So that's where a lot of
Right, right, right.
internal struggle started to come. So it's a really fascinating, not even just India, but like globally, how we see this flux. You know, first we want to bring people in, and then a few generations we're pushing people out. So it's really fascinating when we see that. So, and when it comes to identity, like you said, you know, nationalism, national identity, I feel like sometimes it's made in such a way that it can be like weaponized, or it can be used to, you know, make a certain agenda, but it does have positive effects as well, like creating community, making pride, you know, wanting to participate in the government, wanting to participate in like paying taxes and community projects. So it's definitely a double-edged sword in that kind
Yeah,
of way.
hugely. I think that's what I'm
So
really trying to get my head around at the moment, is like how, you know, I really recognize that in order for us to we're in a weird time where sort of our ideas and our communities that we can build for ourselves online sort of exist in cyberspace, but our political lives, we live in very geospecific polities in which, you know, we have laws and taxes and we've got to all get on. And I think, you know, having some sort of collective identity is very important. I guess it's just like, how do we define that identity?
So as you've been improving on your identity, and one of the biggest things that you keep coming back to is language, and I think that's one of the main things that stuck out for me as I went through your pages, just how interested you are in the language, not just in Punjabi, but I saw also you're into Spanish and Russian. I think I stumbled upon some old YouTube videos where you're on a beach speaking Spanish, and I was
Oh, yeah.
like, okay. So there is a sizable Punjabi population in the UK. As a result of that, do you find that there are a lot of community resources and ways for people to learn the language through schooling, either formally or informally outside of schools? What is there?
I must admit, I found it quite difficult to find resources when it comes to learning Punjabi. I think there's more, I think often Punjabi education, language education, has been very tied to sort of Sikh education as well. So it's been within gurdwaras, and you know, that was, I went to one of the first Punjabi schools lessons I went to as a kid was at a gurdwara that my grandparents went to. I used to go with them quite a lot. I never really got on with that. I didn't find the style of teaching there to be particularly, it was all, it's basically just sort of recite the alphabet over and over again, and hopefully maybe something went in. But I think, you know, some schools in the Midlands, you know, when I was growing up, I think GCSE Punjabi was available and things like that. But, you know, I'm only speaking from my experience. My experience was that I grew up speaking it. I didn't really learn to read or write. The resources I had were, say, books from India, or like a couple of textbooks that I think we had in the house. But there was nothing that I could go to and be like, oh yeah, if I really wanted to, this would be easy. I had to, in my sort of adult life, as I realised that I wanted to retain the language and to learn to read and write, it was through finding stuff online, YouTube, learning the alphabet by YouTube videos, then using dictionaries. And that was all only really because I had a fundamental understanding of the language. I was able to navigate some of that stuff. I think if I was coming to it sort of, you know, from scratch, it would be quite difficult. I mean, you know, it would be nice to, that's something I'm sort of really thinking about. I know when we've been discussing, I've been thinking about, you know, what can I do to help with that? Because, you know, I think there are great teachers at places like SOAS, here in London, and you know, there's just such a wealth of knowledge in the community as well. You know, one of my mentors with at the UK Punjab Heritage Association, he's an incredible linguist. He knows, like, you know, not only does he know Punjabi inside out, but various like older styles of Punjabi, and different you know, the different traditions within the language. And I speak to him, and he sort of helps me out with all sorts of stuff. But he's got like a day job working for like a pharmaceuticals company. It's like, so there is immense knowledge out there.
Yeah, you find a lot of people like that where they're doing one job. Like I know I have a really close friend who's a computer programmer and he's a lecturer for computer programming. But if you ask him about, this person's, religious practice during this era in this region of Kerala, he was like, oh yes, I can tell you all about this. And so it's just, where do you get that from?
Yeah.
So.
It always makes me feel like a
But
massive
that,
underachiever because I'm like, I'm trying to make this like my thing. I'm like, how are you doing this and also you got a full-on job going on?
But that brings me to my next point is that when you're learning a language, there are a lot of barriers, not just with resources, but also just the variety within a language, especially if you're learning it informally. So, for example, Malayalam has a variety of dialects from north to south. Like what you have in the Kasaragod region, which is the most northernmost, is said to be almost unintelligible to people from the south because it's a mix of neighboring languages and other traditions. And so, doing my research, I realized there's at least a dozen dialects of Punjabi.
Yeah, I don't know the full figures, but yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, there's certain words that I use that I know that others don't. One of which is onions. I've always said gunde growing up, but I know a lot of people say pyaz, and that's. I have a Punjabi friend from Delhi who she finds when I say a gunde, she finds it like really hilarious because it sounds like a rude word.
That's funny. That's funny. So I wonder if any Punjabis are watching this right now and giggling a little bit.
I like gunde, which one? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it was only till like a few years ago that I learned that the do pyaz, like. They're like, yeah, so what's the, the recipe is like a curry, like do pyaz, and it means like 2 onions, do pyaza, and I was like, oh, right, okay, yeah, I was like, yeah, mine would be the do gande.
So, in addition to that, there's also tones in Punjabi, which is quite unique to a lot of Sanskrit-based languages. I was looking up that the word for horse and the word for whip are very close in prononciation.
Yes,
do you know which ones
yeah.
are
I don't.
yeah.
I know I don't use the word for whip that often, so I don't know how. I know well, horse is kora, but like you would say, but a very similar one that is similar, not whip, but like for the word for bitter, is kora. Like when you say like bitter, kora, and and so it's like. Oh yeah, the tones really mess me up because if I really think about them like I'm thinking about them now, it's like I find it almost impossible to say. And that's been one of the difficulties actually, trying to like learn new stuff as an adult. It's like some of this stuff, I don't know how the sort of my child brain, our child brains are just so good at like absorbing these subtle nuances. As an adult, it's like you're like, come on, go in.
I feel like as a child we are just fearless, so we just say whatever and we get corrected and we remember it and we just move on. But like I think as adults we have such egos, and we get very sensitive, so then like we're agonizing over the things we say, and whenever we make a mistake, instead of just laughing it off, we're like, oh my god, like what am I doing? So then it just gets a little crazy. So now I'd like to move on to something fun because we've talked a bit about your background and things from your culture and language, and I think I want to try to kind of infuse a bit of Punjabi into Malayalam classics. All right, so I've got something fun for you here. All right, so my idea is I have some beloved Mollywood classics here and some popular lines from them. But what we're going to do is we're going to dub them in Punjabi. So I'm going to be putting your acting skills to work here.
It's become an audition.
To help us bring Mollywood. Yes, to help us bring Mollywood to a Punjabi audience, okay? So our first clip comes from a very popular movie called Big B. It's called a mass movie, right? So you have Mammootty's character Bilal, who went away to Mumbai to go do, criminal work, underground work, but his caretaker gets murdered, and so he returns to the city to figure out who did it and settle debts and get his brothers back together to fight off this gang. And so just before he beats these guys up, this guy tries to put him off, and he's like, this isn't the old Kochi that you know. So he replies basically saying, this may not be the old Kochi, but I am still the old Bilal. And so it's like the one liner before everybody starts flying everywhere.
Pretty badass.
Now,
Okay.
let's see if we can get you to emulate the
Right,
Punjabi
I'm just gonna
Mammootty.
play it back so I can hear it one more time, and then I'll see if I can get it. Okay, here we go. Okay. ਮੈਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਕੋਚੀ ਪੁਰਾਣਾ ਕੋਚੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਬਿਲਾਲ ਹਾਲੇ ਵੀ ਪੁਰਾਣਾ ਬਿਲਾਲ ਹੈ.
Whoa, Adipoli! That means cool.
It pops up.
So Mammootty actually just had his birthday. He's 69 years old, but
Oh, really?
everyone's
It's like my
he
dad.
looks 40 or younger.
My dad
you know,
seems to
like,
reverse
everyone
age.
just looks at him like, wow. Wow. And his son is Dulquer Salman, and he is not only in Mollywood but other Indian movies as well. Cool. All right, so the next movie we have is Sandesham, and Sandesham means message. And we have two brothers, and they're in opposing political factions. In Kerala, politics is very important and it's very intense. The first thing people do is they drink their chaya and they read the newspaper and they argue with each other about, politics. So Malayalis are very politically literate and they vote and they're very active in political community scenes. So this movie, which is still quite relevant today, has a house with two brothers from opposing parties and they're constantly fighting. So in this scene, we have Tilikan, who's the father, sitting there after retiring and coming home and looking forward to a lifetime of retirement and realizing that his two sons that are jobless are going to be driving him crazy. And so this argument that they're having is about their ideology. And one brings up, well, if you love communism so much, why don't we just, talk about what happened in Poland? So this is a very quick one-liner and it's well known. Like if you just say Poland to a Malayali, they'll just start giggling because they think about this movie. So.
Oh, that is great.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just gonna find the clip again. Oh yeah, okay. Poland बारे कोई गल ना कर, मैंने पसंद नहीं है.
Very nice.
And it was more like don't talk about Poland
it's just one of
rather
those
than
lines.
what happened. But I don't think I can get that to fit in the gap.
Alright, so the next one we have is Namoko Parkan Bundari Topukal. It means a vineyard for us to stay in, and it's a reference to the Song of Solomon. And this movie is basically about overcoming societal barriers. And so Mohanlal falls in love with literally the girl next door, but the family is not seen as well off, and they try to make a lot of arguments back and forth, and it talks about class and whatnot, and it's just a really beautiful movie in the way that it circumvents a lot of societal expectations, but it's not preachy, and it's just it's like one of the top romantic roles that Mohanlal has done. And so this scene is basically him proposing his love to her, and he wants to do it in a nice, subtle way, and so he decides to quote a Bible verse, and so this is the way he dreamily says the verse, and he intentionally leaves off the last part so that she can go look it up in the Bible and read it herself and realize that it was a confession of love.
Right.
So it's just one of those dreamy.
Man,
yeah,
this is that is some full on romance.
Yeah.
I love like that zoom in, like on the face. It's like there's a lot of words here that I don't use on a regular basis. I mean, how to say the vines have budded, I'm not quite sure, but I'll give it my best shot. Okay. ਅਸੀਂ ਰਾਤ ਪਿੰਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਹਿਣਾ, ਫਿਰ ਸਵੇਰੇ ਸਵੇਰੇ ਬਾਗ ਚਲੀਏ ਅੰਗੂਰ ਦੇਖਣ ਲਈ, ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੇਖਾਂਗੇ ਜੇ ਅਨਾਰ ਦੀ ਫਲ ਕੁੱਲੇ ਹੋਏ.
And so the next line is, he's like, do you know the rest of it? And she's like, no. And he's like, go look it up.
Look it up in the Bible.
So she goes and looks it up, and she opens the Bible, and the next line says, and there I'll give my love to you. And she's like, So our last one is from a classic. It's called Manachittatare. And it's the original ghost story movie, and basically any Malayali alive right now has seen it at least 10 times, and it's been made into Tamil, it's been made into Hindi, it's been made across India in various remakes, but any Malayali will just tell you, just watch our version of the first one. And so in this movie, the actress is Shobana, and she is suffering from some kind of possession or mental illness. They don't know, they're trying to figure out what's going on. So this scene is very, very famous. It's like sampled in a lot of comic skits. referenced across pop culture. So basically, this is the scene where the husband sees Shobana pretty much switch personalities right in front of his face, and she goes from this caring, loving wife to this angered ghost. And so this is like such a terrifying delivery that is just felt across generations. So that's the scene that we're setting here.
Okay.
So you get to
Get
be
into the space.
the possessed Shobana.
Okay. इजाजत नहीं देना, इजाजत नहीं देना, मैं इधरों किधर नहीं जा सकती.
Woo!
I even did it as
Nice.
a female speaker as well. So
Great. So we just went over some Mollywood classics and injected them with some Punjabi flavor. That was really fun. And before we close, there's a couple more topics I'd like to talk about. First of all, you're affiliated with a charity on your website. Can you tell us a little bit more about this charity?
yeah, so I'm an ambassador for Child Poverty Action Group. They're a charity that they're sort of, well, I don't really know if you can like sort of describe a charity as being sexy, but they're not a sexy charity. They sort of do a lot of behind the scenes work. They campaign for legislation to change laws which adversely affect families in the UK. And in the UK, I think it's 1 in 4 children are growing up in poverty, and it's outrageous really that's the case. So they provide training, resources, information to help change that, and it's incredible because when we had a thing with the bedroom tax here in the UK, which they managed to change, and that because they were able to change that at a sort of legislative level, it affected numerous people. So they're really getting to the root cause of what is causing poverty in the UK, and how that's affecting families. So yeah, I sort of help try and promote their work as much as possible, and 10% of the profits from the sale of these t-shirts.
That's really good to focus on legislation, right? Because these are the kinds of things that will affect generations to come. It's not just, of course there are people now that need help, but we have to think about, things that are sustainable and long-term. So this is really great that this is something that could possibly affect generations to come. So
Yeah.
That's wonderful. And then you said that you have t-shirts that are supporting the charity, and the t-shirt.
So we've got t-shirts, hoodies, sweaters. They're made, so I'm working with a company called T-Mill. So a lot of the cottons sort of ethically sourced from India, and then they're printed up made up in a renewables factory on the Isle of Wight, I think, in the UK. And it's fantastic. I just really wanted a way to have some merch. So I quite like being able to sport the idea on my chest. They're available via my website.
So what are your future projects? What do you have coming down the pipeline? You wear a lot of hats. Like, not only are you an actor, but it looks like you produce, and you're involved in a lot of community programs and whatnot. So you're juggling a lot of things. Right now.
I've got a TV series that I've been writing with my sister, which is with my sister Ramanique Ahluwalia, about it's like a half-hour comedy drama series, which is sort of based on our experiences of being mixed and the sort of differences between our experiences. So we're in the process of sort of pitching that and talking to agents and producers at the moment. And then I've also been doing work with the UK Punjab Heritage Association, hosting some of their virtual book clubs, which was an event that started up because of the pandemic and has become incredibly popular.
It seems like the internet has been like a really good medium for expressing new experiences than what we see on mainstream television. Do you feel that the internet is doing a better job at being more representative of different communities and different experiences, because it's more in the hands of content creators and there's less bureaucracy and television producing and all that?
Yeah, I guess there's no gatekeepers when it comes to social media. I still feel that the form of film, TV, theatre, as forms, they're very specific and unique and wonderful, and I really want to see more of our stories up on those screens and stages. These stories, especially the story of like India and a lot of South Asian history is also the history of Britain, but there's a sort of amnesia in the UK. I know William Dalrymple, who I interviewed a few weeks back for the UK Punjab Heritage Association, put forward the idea of a museum of colonial history in the UK, and I think that's very much needed. And I think as part of that, it's about having that history be a part of our culture, and not just the history as well, like present day experiences.
Do you feel that there's a bit of tokenism? Like they feel like, well, we already got that Indian show, so we don't need another Indian show. Or,
Oh,
like,
hugely,
we already have
yeah.
this community.
I've had pictures of a documentary that I was working on that was looking at Sikh not Sikh history, but an element of Sikhi was basically mothballed because they'd had another Sikh project out, and it's like they're wildly different, like in their scope and what they were looking at, but they were like, well, there's only that one box to fill. You know, I think the journalist Satnam Sangera's like talked about this as well, is that as a result of the way in which it's like, well, we've got this ethnic box that we need to fill, it doesn't matter what goes in there, and as a result minorities end up competing for the same box, and it's actually we don't need just that one, we need the whole spectrum.
Because like, how many crime dramas do we have on TV? It seems like there's infinite boxes for
There's
crime dramas, but yet like.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about Unforgotten that I do for ITV, because you know one of the lead detectives in that is played by Sanjeev Bhaskar, and so it's wonderful to see a lead character detective, a guy who looks like my dad, and it's
and that's another thing. I think a lot of programming, when they have a person from a certain community, they make it about that. Like, we have to show how Indian this Indian person is, instead of just being like, here's this really fleshed out character who happens to be of Indian descent. And I think that TV is slowly getting that way, but there's still a lot of room for improvement, I think.
There's a huge amount of room for improvement. I would say, those sort of instances are quite rare and notable for their rarity. I think they're usually the exceptions, not the rule.
So as we finish up, do you have any parting words? Like a lot of people that follow my page, they're from Kerala or they're in India, and we recently had this series about multicultural couples, and so a result of multicultural couples are multicultural children, and we have adults as well of these couples. And are there any things that you would like to pass on?
I think what I would say is that always remember that you are the authority on your own identity. Whatever, we all have incredibly diverse heritages, especially within India. So don't let anybody else define who you are. That's what I would say. For me, that's what Both Not Half is about me saying, this is who I am, this is how I identify. It's not for you to tell me who I am. It's for me to really define that for myself.
Before we leave, can you tell me how to say see you later in Punjabi?
I would always just say see you later. I guess Fer Milange. Yeah, that would be like Fer Milange.
Per Malange.
Fer Milange. Yeah, we'll meet again.
So in Malayalam, it's Pinne Karnam.
Pinne Kana. Kanam. Pinne Kanam.
Yeah, Karnam.
Okay.
Pinne Karnam. Thank you so much. You take care.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.